For Your Ears Only for the week of November 20th, I'm David Alpern.
I'm Melissa Exelberth.
Handle it for the following reason. No, that's a different one. I got to go back to see. Got all this stuff twirling around in my head.
There's a confidentiality agreement there that I can't go into detail with, but I never did any lobbying for anyone in the years I was out of office.
I happen to believe it is time to create a part-time Congress where their pay is cut in half, their office budgets are cut in half, and their time in Washington is cut in half.
The Republican presidential race continued its roller coaster course last week, with one after another contender rising to challenge Mitt Romney, then falling to increased scrutiny and self-inflicted wounds. Herman Cain's consternation over charges of sexual harassment were compounded by his fumbled response to a question about Libya at the Milwaukee Journal-Sentinel. As Cain sank in many polls, former House Speaker Newt Gingrich rose, only to face new disclosures of multi-million-dollar fees he took from the shadowed Federal Home Loan Mortgage Corporation, Freddie Mac, and the healthcare industry, involving positions he now rejects. And one-time frontrunner Rick Perry remained far down in the pack, despite an attention-getting plan to cut congressional presence and power in half.
To analyze the polls and politics of the Republican race, President Obama's response and prospects for the Congressional Supercommittee on Deficit Reduction, For Your Ears Only, we're joined again by Dr. Ron Faucheux, president of Clarus Research and an expert on polling and political campaigns. Welcome back to our program.
Thank you. Happy to be with you.
In your latest survey of national polls, President Obama again just edges Romney by 2 percentage points, breezes past Perry, Cain, and Gingrich by about a dozen. Are the numbers on those choices more or less important than Obama's job approval rating in these tough times, up to only 46% at one point last week, but then back down to 42%?
Well, for Obama's campaign, job approval is the most important. And by the way, his approval is now 11 points lower than the vote he got in 2008, which is a big problem for him. For Republicans, the trial heats are more important because they need to find a nominee who can beat Obama.
But the question is that even for all voters, when it comes to it, it will be a choice not between Obama and whoever the Republicans nominate. So does he have some comfort there that he may be down, but nobody is much better?
Sure. He does have comfort there because the polls consistently show that an Obama-Romney race would be very close, but that the other candidates that the Republicans are looking at would have a big deficit against Barack Obama at this point. So flesh and blood candidates make a difference, and that is Obama's possible comeback right now.
When can we expect to see solid polling that reflects the revelations about Gingrich ties to special interests and Cain's fumble on foreign policy?
Well, it takes a couple of weeks for reaction to set in. The Cain collapse is already underway, according to the polls. We won't know about Gingrich probably until the first week in December.
Do you see Romney being hurt much by this week's Boston Globe disclosure that his former gubernatorial staff wiped out much of the email record of his entire State House years?
No, not based on what we've seen so far. There would have to be a lot more to that before that I think could have a big impact on this race.
The continuing anyone but Romney syndrome and his inability to snare more than 25% of Republicans polled suggest GOP dissatisfaction with the field. What are the numbers on that and the likelihood that yet another contender will come in at this late date?
You know, I think it's not so much anybody but Romney, but that there are two kinds of candidates. People view some of the candidates as potential presidents, and they view some of the candidates as protest vehicles. Donald Trump, Michelle Bachmann, and Herman Cain were really seen as protest candidates, just like Howard Dean was in 2004 on the Democratic side, and really George Wallace was in the 1960s and 1970s. But when protest candidates start doing well, then they're judged by the higher standards of a potential president, and that's when they get into trouble. Romney's always been judged by Republican voters as a potential president. But during the 4 weeks between Thanksgiving and Christmas, I think we'll see the kaleidoscope will shift, the desire for protest vehicles will subside, and Republicans will turn to actually nominating a president. And at that point, it's likely that there will be two candidates standing, Romney and somebody else. At this point, the somebody else looks like Gingrich, but we don't know yet.
Do you see any other backbench candidates moving into front-running positions if Gingrich slips? John Huntsman, Ron Paul, who has strong niche support that could give him a big early boost in Iowa.
Well, Iowa would be the key there. If somebody like Paul or Santorum runs unexpectedly well in Iowa, which is not impossible, they could emerge. Huntsman's only opportunity to emerge would really be in New Hampshire. And if none of the candidates merge, then Romney may just have to fight out a war of attrition as weaker candidates compete and fall away.
What does the polling say about expectations for a deficit reduction deal from the Congressional Supercommittee based on significant new tax revenue?
The budget swamp is always a treacherous place for politics. Voters don't want higher taxes. They don't want higher deficits. But they don't want cuts in popular things like national defense or Social Security, Medicare, veterans benefits. Whatever the committee does or doesn't do, it will likely not be very popular.
And if there is no deal, who gets the balance of blame?
Well, we'll have to see who does what and how they do it. But I should add, we'll also have to see who gets the blame if there is a deal, because a deal may not be so popular.
But I think you one of your surveys, one of your reports this week said that there was a slightly greater number saying the Republicans would be to blame than the Democrats.
Well, at this point, most surveys are showing that Republicans are seen more as obstacles than Democrats are in terms of getting things done in Congress. And I think that's largely because of the public attention on the Republican leadership and control of the House. And I think that would ultimately play for the supercommittee as well. But it all frustrates voters, and that's not good for an incumbent, and it comes back around on the president as well.
As a former senatorial chief of staff, what expectation do you have that Congress will actually permit the backup budget cuts it passed to go into effect in 2013 as scheduled if there's no deal?
Well, I think it's likely we'll see two things happen. One, they'll take the backup cuts, the so-called budget triggers or sequesters, and try to make them more palatable, especially by reducing defense cuts. And the second thing is that most of the cuts they will go forward with would probably be backloaded over a 10-year period, so none of it would cause much pain before the elections. I think there is still a chance that there would be a deal to make those adjustments so that the triggers don't go into effect.
Dr. Ron Faucheux is president of Clarus Research and an expert on polling and political campaigns.
Quote from the news, "The Antichrist needed to kill him." Those were views of President Obama attributed to 21-year-old Oscar Ramiro Ortega Hernandez of Idaho Falls, accused of spraying bullets from an assault rifle at the residential floors of the White House. Hernandez has a criminal record, and friends say he was disturbed and increasingly fixated on a presidential assassination.
Next, after Occupy, other approaches for reforming U.S. politics and finance. For your ears only.